His daughter ran away for 2 days and returned with an Apache woman's hand. Dad will protect her. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The sharp wind rolling across Red Willow Basin carried the first signs of winter as Grant Mercer urged his horse along the narrow ridge trail. His shoulders tight, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the pines below as he searched for any sign of movement. Mira had been missing for 2 days, and every hour that passed hit him harder than the last. The cold snap had arrived earlier than expected, dropping the night temperatures to a level no child should face without shelter, and the fear biting at him felt immediate and real. Grant had always been cautious with Mira. After losing his wife during a violent raid 4 years earlier, he had taken on the role of father and protector with a seriousness that bordered on rigid. He worked their small spread alone, repaired fences by hand, hunted enough game to keep food on the table, and tried to raise Mira to recognize danger before it reached her. She was quick, sharp, and stubborn in a way that reminded him of her mother, and most days he handled her free-spirited nature with patience. But when she failed to return from checking the lower trap line, a route she had walked dozens of times, something inside him locked tight, and the panic he had tried to suppress since his wife's death came back stronger than he expected. He had spent the first day searching every path she might have wandered to, riding through brush, sliding down creek beds, and calling her name until his throat hurt. On the second morning, he woke from a brief, restless sleep with his heart pounding and his shirt damp, convinced he had already run out of time. He saddled the horse before the sun was fully up, skipped breakfast, and rode back toward the far ridge where the land dipped sharply toward the southern basin. The light that morning was flat and pale, making distance difficult to judge. Grant slowed his horse whenever a dark shape flickered between the trees, checking each shadow as though any one of them might turn into Mira. Sweat mixed with the cold on his brow, and he wiped it away with the back of his hand, frustrated at how little the effort was helping him think clearly. His mind kept replaying the last conversation with her, how she had said she would be quick, how he had reminded her to stay within the markers, how she had smiled as if nothing bad could possibly happen. He blamed himself for letting her walk out alone, even though he knew the routine had been safe 100 times before. At the creek, he lowered himself from the saddle and approached the frost-bitten rocks to check for tracks. The mud near the bend had hardened overnight, leaving no marks to read. He crouched there longer than he needed to, trying to steady his breathing. He pressed his palms into the cold earth, the ache in his chest tightening as he let the silence wrap around him. He stood slowly and scanned the tree line again. The shadows between the trunks shifted with the wind, making him second-guess every direction. He shook off the hesitation and chose to follow the ridge upward, thinking she might have taken the higher route to avoid the sudden drop in temperature near the creek. His horse was tiring. Grant could hear the animal's breathing deepen, could feel its back muscles working beneath his legs. He stroked its neck and whispered for it to hold on, promising rest once they reached the upper clearing. The horse responded with a slow nod of the head, as if it understood the urgency. Grant reached the top of the ridge late in the afternoon. The wind was harsher there, rolling down from the distant red cliffs. He pulled his coat tighter, adjusted the revolver on his hip, a habit he barely noticed anymore, and called Myra's name again. His voice cracked mid-call, and he stopped, swallowing hard as a sharp pain moved behind his ribs. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine the worst, and the thought hit him so hard he had to brace one hand against the saddle horn. He forced himself upright, shaking his head as if he could physically push the fear away. He told himself that Mira was tough, resourceful, and capable. He needed to believe that right now, because the alternative was unbearable. He turned toward the slope leading to the basin and froze. Movement flickered at the edge of the pine line, slow, uneven, and unmistakably human. Grant felt his pulse jump. He stepped forward, one hand lifting slightly in instinctive readiness. The figure drew closer. It was Mira. Her small body was hunched inside her oversized coat, her hair tangled, her steps dragging. She lifted her head just enough for him to see her tired eyes and cracked lips. Her cheeks were red from the wind, and the relief that washed through him came so strong he almost lost his balance. He moved toward her, calling her name in a low, shaking voice. She tried to answer, but only managed a faint sound. Then he saw someone walking beside her. A young Apache woman followed at Myra's side, barefoot on the cold ground, her legs unsteady. Her deerskin dress was torn at the hem and along the chest, exposing bruises along her collarbone and ribs. Her wrists were raw, the skin scraped and swollen. Her long black hair was loosely braided, with strands sticking to her face from sweat and cold. She moved like someone accustomed to pain, but not to safety. Myra held her hand tightly, refusing to let go even for a second. Grant approached slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. He could see how frightened the woman was. Her eyes scanned him, the horse, the ridgeline behind them, searching for threats. He placed a hand gently on Myra's shoulder. "What happened?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Myra swallowed and looked up at him with a seriousness he had rarely seen in her. "She needs help," she said. "Men hurt her, and they might come back." The woman flinched at the word men, her eyes sharpening in alarm. Grant raised both hands slightly in a gesture of peace. "You're safe," he said quietly. "We'll get you out of the cold." She didn't answer, but her shoulders eased by a small measure. Grant lifted Myra onto the horse first, making sure she was secure before turning to the woman. Up close, he could see the bruises more clearly, the uneven swelling along her arms, the deep purple marks on her ribs. She shivered hard as the wind cut across the ridge. He reached for her elbow with slow, deliberate movements. She hesitated, eyes darting upward, then allowed him to help her climb behind Myra. Her breath trembled as she settled onto the saddle, gripping Myra's waist for balance. Grant took the reins and began walking, leading the horse down toward the cabin. He kept glancing back to check on them, seeing Myra lean gently against the woman as if she understood the fragility of her condition. The Apache woman watched Grant's movements the entire way, her eyes alert, her posture tightening each time the wind rustled the trees behind them, as though danger might appear from the shadows at any moment. Grant felt a heavy responsibility settle over him, not only for Myra, who he had gotten back by the thinnest margin, but for the woman whose survival now depended on decisions he had not prepared himself to make. The smell of distant smoke drifted across the basin as they approached the cabin, and Grant's instincts sharpened again, but he kept moving, determined not to stop until all three of them were behind his door and out of the cold. He didn't know who the woman was or what kind of trouble followed her, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Tonight, she would not face it alone. Grant reached the cabin just as the sky dimmed into a dull gray, the cold creeping in fast enough that he hurried to get the door open before either Myra or the Apache woman slipped from the saddle. The moment they stepped inside, the warmth from the fireplace wrapped around them, carrying the smell of burning pine and old wool, and Grant felt some of the tightness in his chest loosen as the door shut behind them with a solid thud that reminded him the inside of these walls still had the power to keep danger out. The woman's legs buckled once her feet touched the floor. Grant caught her by the arm before she could drop, easing her toward the wooden bench near the fire. Myra stayed beside her, refusing to take her hand away, and Grant realized it wasn't just protection. It was the only thing keeping the woman steady. Now that she was in better light, he could see the extent of the damage on her skin. The purple swelling across her ribs looked worse than he expected, the small cuts along her arms uneven and deep, and the raw marks around her wrists showed rope had not only held her, but dragged against her long enough to tear layers of skin. She sat stiffly, trying not to show how much each breath hurt, her eyes moving across the room in short, quick patterns as if she thought danger might step through the walls. Grant set his hat down and knelt beside her, keeping enough distance so she wouldn't feel cornered. "What's your name?" he asked, speaking gently. She hesitated, glanced at Myra for reassurance, then answered in a quiet voice. "Tala." Myra squeezed her hand harder, as if confirming it. Grant nodded once. He didn't ask more. Not yet. He brought a bucket of warm water from the stove and set it on the floor. Without warning, Tala covered her wrists with both hands and pulled them close to her chest, her reaction sharp enough to make Mira flinch. "It's all right," Grant said, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm just getting water. Nothing else." Tala's breathing settled slightly, but she didn't uncover her wrists. Grant recognized the look. He had seen the same guarded tension years ago when he helped treat children after the raid that killed his wife. He understood she didn't want anyone grabbing her. Mira leaned closer to Tala and whispered something Grant couldn't hear. Tala blinked slowly, then extended her arms just enough for Mira to dip a cloth in the warm water and clean the blood at the edges of the rope burns. Her shoulders shook with the sting, but she didn't pull away from the girl. Grant watched the pair, understanding for the first time why Mira had chosen not to come home immediately. Someone this wounded would not have survived a night alone, and Mira was the kind of child who would rather face danger herself than leave someone behind. Grant stood to check the window shutters, making sure each latch was firmly set. While he worked, he listened to Tala's shallow breaths and Myra's quiet words. That uneasiness in Tala's posture caught his attention. She kept glancing toward the door, not like someone afraid the cold would leak in, but like someone expecting men she recognized to appear without warning. Grant turned back to her. "Who's after you?" he asked. Tala didn't look up. She stared at the flames in the fireplace and answered in small pieces, speaking English carefully as if choosing words she rarely used. "Camp near the border. They take people. Hold them. Sell them. I ran away 2 days ago." They followed. Grant felt a cold jolt move through him. He knew rumors, illegal holding camps, men moving people like livestock, but hearing it from someone who escaped was different. He crouched beside her again. "Did they see you come this way?" Tala shook her head slowly. "I hid when I heard them. I stayed off the trail." Mira added softly. She was hiding under a fallen tree. She couldn't walk very far. That answered another unspoken question: why Mira had not come home the first evening. She must have spent the night with Tala, covering her with Myra's own coat, trying to keep her warm as best as a 12-year-old could. Grant's throat tightened as the weight of that realization hit him. He prepared food, simple broth with potatoes and small pieces of dried meat. Tala hesitated before taking the bowl, as if waiting for someone to snatch it away. Grant noticed this and deliberately stepped back, letting Mira take over. Tala ate in small, careful bites, her movements slow and deliberate. When she finished, Grant laid out blankets near the fire. He expected her to lie down, but she remained seated, shoulders tight, feet pressed close together. "You can rest," he said. Tala looked toward Mira again, not Grant. "If Mira sleeps here," she whispered, "I sleep here." Grant understood more in that moment than anything else. Tala had latched onto Mira because the girl was the only person she had seen in days who didn't hurt her. The bond was immediate, protective, and strong enough that Tala's safety depended on staying close to her. Grant adjusted the blankets, so Myra's cot was moved closer to the fire and closer to Tala's. He didn't argue. Once both were settled, Mira drifted to sleep almost instantly, exhaustion overtaking her. Tala, however, lay awake with her eyes half open, watching the door without blinking. Grant sat in the chair across from them, his elbows resting on his knees, thinking through what to do next. He knew the law in Red Willow Basin was thin. If the men chasing Tala reached his land, there would be no sheriff arriving in time to help. He would be the one standing between danger and the two people now sleeping under his roof. He also realized something else. Tala had not told him everything. She mentioned the camp and the escape, but he could see in her posture the pieces she held back. How she was captured, how long she was kept there, and what happened in the days before Mira found her. A sudden knock of wind against the shutters made Tala jolt upright. Her breath hitched, her hands gripping the blanket. Grant raised a hand in a calming gesture. "It's just the wind," he said. "Nothing else." Tala lowered herself slowly, still shaking, her eyes fluttering between Grant and the fire as she forced herself to breathe more evenly. Grant stayed awake long after both of them settled again. He studied the flicker of the flames, listened to each creak of the wooden walls, monitored every rustle outside. By the time dawn approached, One truth had settled fully into his mind. Bringing Tala here wasn't just an act of mercy. It was a decision that would change the entire balance of his life and Myra's. Someone had hunted this woman. Someone might still be searching. And now the responsibility was his, whether he was ready for it or not. The first light of morning pushed into the cabin in thin streaks that barely warmed the room, and Grant straightened from the chair where he had spent the night half awake, watching for danger and listening to the wind shift across the basin. His back ached from staying seated for hours, but he ignored it and stood slowly, stretching just enough to work the stiffness out. Tala and Mira were still asleep. Mira curled on her side with one hand under her cheek, Tala lying rigid on her blanket with her eyes half open, as though even in sleep she refused to let her guard drop. Grant stepped outside for a moment to check the yard, closing the door quietly so neither of them startled. Frost clung to the fence rails in a thin white layer, and his horse stood near the corral with its head low, breathing small clouds into the cold air. The ground held no fresh tracks except their own, which answered one question he knew listeners would wonder: whether the men Tala escaped from had followed their trail during the night. The land remained undisturbed, giving them a small window of safety. Still, Grant's instincts told him caution was needed. He spent a few minutes reinforcing the side gate with a heavy beam he had never bothered to move before, then checked the old rifle leaning near the porch. It worked well enough, though its accuracy had faded over the years, and he made a mental note to see if he still had spare bullets stored in the back of the cellar. When he re-entered the cabin, Tala lifted her head sharply, her expression tight until she realized it was only him. Mira woke a moment later and rubbed her eyes, reaching immediately for Tala's hand as though the connection had become part of her morning routine. Grant watched this quietly, trying to understand how quickly they bonded, and he recognized that a child's instinct was often more honest than an adult's suspicion. Grant set water to boil and prepared a simple meal, oats with dry berries, because Tala needed something filling and Mira needed something warm. While they ate, he noticed Tala kept shifting in her seat, her gaze repeatedly landing on the small window facing the yard. Grant understood the look. She was expecting danger to walk out of the timber at any moment. "You didn't sleep much," he said, keeping his tone neutral. Tala lowered her bowl and nodded once. "Dreams," she whispered. Mira leaned closer to her. "Bad ones." Tala answered by tightening her grip on the blanket draped over her legs. Grant saw the way her jaw tensed and realized that whatever haunted her wasn't a simple memory. It was something ongoing, something she thought might still be coming for her. Grant decided it was time to ask what he had avoided the night before. "How did you end up at that camp?" Tala stiffened, her eyes shifting to the fire. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she took a slow breath and spoke in a quiet but steady voice, giving details she had not shared yet. Details the audience would surely question. "My family lived near the foothills," she said. "We followed the deer trails. We stayed away from towns. One morning men came. They were not soldiers. They were not ranchers. They wanted people, not land." Myra's eyes widened. Grant kept his gaze steady, letting her continue at her own pace. "They took my brother first," Tala said, her voice tightening. "Then me. They tied our hands. They traded others in the camp. Some are Navajo. Some are from my band. Some are white women taken from wagons. They kept us in small pens. They beat the ones who tried to run." Grant felt a slow anger building in his chest, the kind that came from knowing there were men in this territory doing harm while the law looked the other way. "What happened to your brother?" he asked. Tala lowered her eyes. "He fought. They killed him." Mira reached for her again, and Tala allowed it, her shoulders dropping slightly as if Myra's touch gave her just enough strength to speak the next part. "They wanted to sell me to men who ride between towns. But I cut the rope with a broken template. I ran when the guards were drunk. I did not stop until the cold made my legs shake." Grant understood now why she clung so tightly to Mira. Tala had lost everyone she knew, and the first person who didn't strike her or drag her was a child offering help without hesitation. Tala lifted her gaze to Grant and asked a question she had avoided until now. "Why did you help me?" Grant paused. He hadn't put the answer into words until she asked.